Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Podcana episode 30. This week, we have some interesting updates in the metagame, as well as some clarification to how locations work, and they are absolutely broken compared to what we were speculating last week. I don't know if they're actually overpowered, but in terms of the power level of what we were speculating on and what they actually are, they're significantly more powerful and less interactable. So we're going to dive into that. But before that, I just want to get y'all's sort of week in Lorcana. I mean, have you been playing? Has anything changed? I know we hopped on before the pod. Kawa, obviously, you're talking about your affinity for Amber Steel in the current metagame. You talked about Ruby Amethyst as well, as that might have been your deck for the season if there had been a competitive season associated with this metagame. Anything else to add on to
that? Not too much, to be honest. I'm still happy to see that Sapphire Ruby is, I wouldn't say, I don't know if I want to call it a meta deck. It still absolutely destroys Amber Steel, but Ruby Amethyst is still pretty good into it as well. I would say at the moment, those are my three favorite decks. I don't want to say best decks in the meta or anything like that, but mainly because I feel like Sapphire Ruby has a pretty good matchup into your Amber Steel. Amber Steel can still take down Ruby Amethyst if you do some crazy wheel shenanigans, and I just like games in Lorcana that are close, that you feel like you actually have a shot in coming back, and it's not just completely one-sided. And I feel like it's like something that you've mentioned throughout the episodes, Brendan. Like, they've done a fantastic job of balancing the game. But speaking of that, I mean, I don't know. Let's see what locations will bring. I know you were saying with the introduction of locations, we could see control possibly go down or disappear. I don't know if it's going to disappear completely, but we'll see.
Let's just hit it real quick. So for the Forgotten Castle, which is the one we talked about last week, it was the Amethyst location. Basically, that lore symbol in the bottom right is a passive amount of lore you gain each turn as the location is on the battlefield. The symbol in the left that had the 1 on it, I don't know what to call that symbol. That's how much you have to pay to move something to that location, which is crazy. So, like, let's look at the Forbidden Mountain. Forbidden Mountain, is it? It's basically a sorcerer's spell book that's inkable. It costs 2, and you have to deal 6 damage to it. So there's a push and pull going on here. Sorcerer's spell book, you can't attack it for 6 damage and clear it. But the fact that this costs 2 and is inkable is just absolutely insane. I mean, what this screams to me is that they're trying to interject combat into the game. Because, like, let's be honest, like, Lorcana, I know the mid-range games are kind of combat-oriented and some of the aggro games are, but in general, combat is not as critical to the game as I thought it would be initially. Maybe that's because I play a lot of control decks, but locations will definitely change that, because you can't be prepared all locations. You're going to have bodies on board to clear these things because they're gaining passive lore every single turn. So I know that, for what will be multiple sets now, we've been talking about the potential downfall of control. I think the locations are actually going to change the dynamic up quite a bit, and our current iteration of control decks are going to have to respond significantly in order to deal with this, because you can't be playing a control deck and letting something like what is this Forbidden Mountain sitting on the battlefield. Like, you have to have board presence to be able to clear these things. Maybe there will be cards that clear locations, maybe, but I actually think that they're going to lean away from that because they want you to interact via killing the location by hitting it and reducing its defensive or its life total, whatever you want to call. Moyen, I saw you were surprised to see this. What are your thoughts on locations?
Yeah, I didn't know that before.
I know, it's crazy.
I think it sounds absolutely crazy that they are passively generating lore with that much HP.
Mm-hmm.
But I like that it will point the game towards board combat being more relevant than it was before.
So you agree with that, right? You think, because that's an opinion, right? This idea that these locations will be so powerful that they will force decks to play more to board and play more combat oriented in order to deal with them. Do you think that they're at that power level? Will they force the metagame to adapt in that way?
So all I know is the Forbidden Mountain, but if they're along the level of Forbidden Mountain, I think they will definitely do that, because even against locations like these, you cannot just sit back and let your opponent chip some lore, then wipe the board, then play some Lady Tremaine that clears 1 card. If they're passively generating 1 lore or for each location, or a little bit of lore for each location that they have on the board, that will not be enough to stabilize.
Yeah.
So you will be forced to to play for board more so that you will be able to clear this, in my opinion.
Yeah, and the dynamic actually goes both ways. So I talked about Control having to respond to this in order to clear locations because they can't just be prepared and then maintain advantage, for the rest of the game. But this is also potentially good for Control as well in some weird way. I think that locations will be pretty aggressive, because they'll be maybe low costed, and Control doesn't usually play a bunch of these characters that engage in combat. But on the other hand, you as a Control deck can play out locations, and then you can just be prepared the board, and you can just wipe your opponent's board and have your locations passively tick up.
So to clarify, do we know now how exactly the locations work? Do we know everything about them? Or?
Yeah, so I think that's pretty much everything in regards to how they work. Is like you have to, so you can move a character to a location, but you can't move it off. So if you want to get one of those effects that exists in the text box, where it's like, oh, this you gain a lore whenever this moves to location. Once you move something to location, you can't move it off. If you kill a location, it doesn't kill the creature on top of it. I mean, there's actually tons of these finicky rules, but it kind of works how you would expect it to. The main takeaways are the lore symbol in the bottom right is passively gained each turn in your setup step. So that also alludes to something that I wasn't super aware of, which there is this setup step. So at the start of your turn or something like that, you gain that lore. And then the symbol in the left is actually how much you have to pay in order to move the character to the location.
Okay, is there any other benefit to moving a character besides that kind of text box? Like, what benefit do I have to have my character at a location? Like, can one of your cards directly challenge my card if it's at a location? Does it have to hit the location's health first? Do we know these?
So I believe you can attack the character on the location. You don't have to attack the location first. And from what I understand, there is no benefit outside of a benefit that is stated on the card in terms of moving to the location.
Sure.
And can you always attack a location, or only when there's some condition met?
I think you can always attack a location.
Okay. So that makes maybe cards like Maui, Scar.
Yeah, I know. It makes these rush cards very good, especially Scar. Scar.
Yeah.
Although Scar is going to be interesting, right? Because it is when you banish. Let's look up the text here. It is when you banish a character, right? So I guess you could wipe a few. Yeah, you could wipe a few characters and then finish off a location. Yeah, so it means if they have loads of locations, you can't do location. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah. So to relieve your Scar exerted, but I think Scar and Maui, maybe their biggest weakness would be sometimes they just don't have a good attack, and with locations being introduced into the game, they will have a lot more good attacks. So I think it will just make these cards a lot better.
Do you think that location, I know we only have Forbidden Mountain. Well, actually we don't because a lot of it gets spoiled, but we don't remember what those look like, and we're not going to talk about them anyway. But say you only have Forbidden Mountain. Do you think that locations look better for Control decks, mid-range decks, or aggro decks right now?
Well, that's an interesting question.
That's a really good question.
So first instinct would be aggro, right? Because it gives them a way to gain some extra lore that's harder to interact with. But then at the same time, you could a 6 HP location. You could think, what if Control just plays this, and then aggro doesn't really want to spend so much tempo attacking into the location, because it will mean every time that they attack, they are not questing with their characters. So there's some interesting dynamic in that as well. And also it can set up for, if locations are good against board wipe, which is right now be prepared, it also means that what if on your turn 6, maybe you wouldn't have a good play, but instead you just play a location or a few locations, and then your opponent is in a really awkward position where they can't really afford to trade into your stuff, but if they don't, you can be prepared and your locations would still be there. So I think that they can be applicable to different archetypes, but maybe more towards aggro.
Yeah, and the fundamentals of Forbidden Mountain as well. You drop it on 2, it has 6 defense, right? So it's going to gain a lore, more than likely. It's probably going to gain 2 lore. So you have this 2 costs, and now it gets 2 lore and tempos your opponent out by making them put 6 damage into it. I mean, Forbidden Mountain in of itself is it feels crazy powerful in the current meta. That would be
the Sorcerer's Spellbook now, and you would think this card is insane, right? The only downside is, yes, it can be hit into, but I mean, for
that's also an upside.
6 HP. Yeah, exactly.
That's a huge tempo loss for your opponent. If your opponent is attacking into this, they can't quest. They're also exerting their character, so now you can clear them off the back end of that. There's so much going on here. Yeah.
At the same time, I'm starting to wonder, because initially I thought okay, passively gaining lore, it's this insane thing, right? But let's compare it. I have a little bit of a thought experiment in my head. Let's compare it to a character. Every character can passively gain lore. It just means that it's able to be attacked. So like every character can quest. That's like nothing crazy. So let's say we had a 2-cost character that has 0 attack and 6 HP and quests for 1. How would we rate that? I mean, of course, locations can't be cleared by stuff like Be Prepared or maybe Dragonfire. I assume they can't be cleared by stuff like that. But still, like on the base level, a 2-cost 0/6 that quests for 1. How good would that be?
It's interesting. So yeah, a 2-cost 0/6 custom. Would you play that in? Let's say that was an Amethyst. Would you play that in the current Amethyst Amber aggro deck?
Probably not, because I mean the Amber Amethyst aggro deck needs to protect their 1-drops instead of having a 2-drop threat. So they need like 1-drops and Simba. That's really what they want. They don't really want on 0/6.
That's a good way to compare, actually.
Yeah, the 0/6 is also. It's only. I feel like it's only super powerful on like the early turns of the game. If you get it late, especially if your opponent's head on board, it's really bad.
It's also because you could also look at it in a way where you say, okay, this is an 0/6, but actually this is an 0/6 that can be attacked already on the turn it's played, which most characters cannot be.
That's very, very true. Yeah, you can't protect this card at all.
Very interesting. So we now have two expansions of Lorcana, or look to be, that are just completely like changing the entire dynamic of the game. I mean, the Rise of the Floodborn sort of changed how lore was gained. Prior to Rise of the Floodborn, lore was very face up in terms of like how much lore your opponent could gain on the following turn. We changed that with this set because there was a lot of like lore out of hand or bouncing and like all these other interactions. So it changed the way lore was attained quite a bit. And now these locations, I mean, they're just wildly different. They're wildly different from characters like anything we've seen before. So, but I do think you can draw that comparison, like you said, to a creature. It does have additional downsides, like it can immediately be attacked. It's hitting back for 0, etc. So, I don't know. It seems powerful, but not as powerful as my initial reaction. Now that we draw,
I think it's like definitely looking forward to seeing how exactly they're balancing these locations, because I think just on their own they're a very interesting concept.
Yeah, let's also consider this is a common location, and I don't know if they'll actually do rare locations. I'm assuming they're all going to be common and uncommon. That might just, I don't know, might be a weird take, but I'm going to assume, you're not going to have some legendary location that's just absolutely busted.
I can see it. Why not?
An enchanted location.
Yeah.
Yeah,
like an armor piece that everyone needs to buy for Flesh and
Blood. Starts in play, stays in play. You do not want to see any of those, to be honest. I mean, really cool. I'm excited to see the spoilers as they continue to drip out. And I love the way that Lorcana does spoilers, how they drip them out to us, and we get, well, outside of the whole second leaked. They drip them out to us, so we get this sort of. We get to build up this story as they slowly drip out, and like we get a better picture of the set as it goes on over a long period of time. That's how you should do spoilers. Flesh and Blood is the antithesis of that, and they do it all in one weekend, and it just sucks. So I love this because I don't know, it expands my theory crafting of the game every single time there's a new card, and that's really fun. Anyway, let's hop onto the competitive tournament deck list we're going to be looking at this week. This is a very small tournament, so I would say.
This is about the same size as the one I was in, realistically. Like, mine was about 25 players, so yeah.
So there's 28 players at Cerebus Den. This is not indicative of the meta, but it's still really interesting to look at. Like last time we looked at a tournament with 200 players. That's a significantly better sample size. Nevertheless, the reason why I bring this up, and of course, if you're listening and you're like, where are these deck lists are talking about? Like in the description, we'll link to the Mushi report that has them all listed. There's a ton of Amber Steel, but more importantly, there's a ton of flutes. What are all these flutes doing in these decks, Moyen? I don't know if you see here in the top 4, we have a deck with 4 flutes. In the top 8, we have another deck with 4 flutes. Both Amber Steel look to be wheel decks. Both Amber Steel wheel decks playing 4 flutes, 4 of.
I cannot say I'm surprised. Maybe people are less ignorant than I first thought. Flutes are just kind of the truth.
Yeah. We also have Amber Ruby sort of making its way back into the metagame to an extent. This was a deck that emerged very, very late into the Chapter 1 metagame, just as the very end. And I think I saw this a little bit early, but the addition of Mother Gothel to this deck and giving you that consistent draw for Rapunzel definitely increased the power level of the deck. They've access to things like Lady Tremaine now. But overall, this is like the quintessential fair mid-range deck, or like the most fair mid-range deck, because Amber Steel's a mid-range deck, but they play a whole new world. This deck just purely exists off of just combat and big set of characters, and of course the card draw via Rapunzel and things like that. And it did plays quite well.
It's a fair deck until Mufasa pulls like a Surfer Stitch that draws cards or something.
Or Maleficent or something, yeah.
Or I guess, wait, does Surfer Stitch draw cards if you pull it? Maybe not. But still, if it just pulls any big card.
Yeah. And Mufasa is just a fascinating card as well. There's one other deck list that looks to have came last that I want to talk about, and that is the Steel Amethyst deck list. It is a Steel Amethyst control deck list. This is the color combination that I want to be good so bad. I just want to get y'all's thoughts on it. I don't think any of us have had a chance to play with Steel Amethyst in this metagame, but what are your thoughts now that they have access to the new beast and they have this draw engine sort of inherent in the deck in itself? Because that was, what did it struggle with before? The main thing it struggled with in regards to being Steel Amethyst and not Ruby Amethyst is didn't have Be Prepared, didn't have Maleficent, didn't have Maui. But the metagame has less aggro, so I think Maui it's still good, but it's not as important as it was, I guess, in Chapter 1. And now you have Beast, which can draw cards, and just like you also have the Cinderella, which we can potentially interact with cards that are not tapped. So I don't know. This is the color combination that I really want to be good in Lorcana.
So this like the control deck that has its limitations. It can't clear huge boards, but it's much better against aggro, and it still has the Amethyst tools to generate value, to bounce your stuff, to maybe have a spell book or something in there to have like some inevitability of lore. So I also still somewhat believe in the color combination. I would have expected to see some different cards. Like I think I still would want the snake mims, so the 2-cost and the 3-cost mims. Mm-hmm. I think I would still want Arthur. I would want to go a little bit more low to the ground, have it be an anti-aggro deck that can also like pack its own punch.
Yeah, I wonder if they found that, Grab Your Swords, Let the Storm Rage On, Strength of Raging Fire, Smash, like all this removal package was enough to deal with aggro that they didn't have to go into that Mata Mim package. But the Mata Mim package just feels a little bit overpowered. It just feels like that was kind of
strong.
If we look at the set, it's like if they made a mistake like anywhere, it's like the Mata Mims are like really, really good. The downside of Mata Mim is not that much of a downside to where you can justify getting like a 2-cost 3/3 out or a 2-cost 4/2 with Rush. Like it's so powerful.
Yeah, especially because.
Go ahead. I was gonna say, I think including because this particular list it doesn't have any. It actually has no bounce cards in it. It has Merlin, but there's no tools in the deck that actually interact with bouncing it. But a reason why I think you would want to just include bounce in a deck like this is because you have such big threats. Like imagine you play Elsa and then you could bounce Elsa and then you can kind of play it again. I've had that done to me before. It's you play these really big bodies, even like Ursula or whatever. You can then attack with it, or you can quest with it, and then you can bring it back to your hand and bounce. Yzma is a card that really surprised me because yes, in comparison to Lady Tremaine, it's I don't know. It has its upsides and its downsides, right? It's inkable, stats are a little bit better. Obviously, if you use it to remove one of your opponent's stuff, you're actually giving them more cards. But even a card like Yzma, if you're just trying to consistently say, okay, I want to stop you from questing, from you doing your thing, you just keep bouncing back cards to their hand, and then you bounce your Yzma back and you can do it again. Or alternatively, you just bounce your Yzma back, bounce your own cards back or shuffle your own cards back into your deck to draw more cards yourself. I think it's just good. And then even if you don't do that crazy big stuff with all of your big cards, we said, the bounce package is already just good with just the mims, bouncing back your cheap 1-cost, getting your Rush card out. I don't know why Mata Mim Rush isn't in this deck, but maybe, like you said, Brendan, it is because they found that this is pretty low to the ground already. I do like the Smash in here. I think Smash is a card that people haven't really expected to see it much. It's kind of gone out of a lot of the Amber Steel decks, but it still is a good card because it hits a lot of really good targets. Like, it hits the Merlins, it hits Ariels. It like Smash is solid, but I also understand why it's not an Amber Steel in this meta, is because you have so many great alternatives to kind of use, and you can kind of do a little bit of chip damage to get rid of the like important singer cards already.
For me, I'm such a big believer in the meta mims. They're not anti-aggro cards. They're also not like, they're not aggro cards. Then they can be everything you want them to be. It's just they're very efficient early game drops that will contest your opponent's board. But if your opponent is not aggressive, they will also just make your own aggressive board that can just chip in lore and will be hard to remove. I think they just which isn't really the greatest thing for a game, but I think if I'm playing Amethyst, I'm playing a few 1-drops and I'm putting the mims in to have like a very strong, consistent, efficient early game.
Yeah, for me, the mono mid package feels like the most, well, I guess it's in contention with the Popsicle draw engine, but it feels like the most overpowered thing to come out of Rise of the Floodborn. Maybe the most overpowered thing in a vacuum, because those cards are so powerful in a vacuum, but we also
they're also so flexible.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Like Popsicle does one thing, it does the draw, but like exactly what Moyen said, it can be anti-aggro, but then even if you draw it in the late game, it can then become value. Like, you can turn it into value, which is like super, super flexible. So
yeah, so like it's good early, it has its applications late game, and all of the cards are inkable. So even when they're bad, they're okay.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Well, like I said, very, very small tournament, but just cool to. I mean, this is a top 8 where there's no Ruby Amethyst. I wouldn't take that as gospel. Be like, this is the metagame. Ruby Amethyst is gone. But it's interesting to see diversity in the meta. I think that this is the kind of metagame that I would expect if I went to an open tournament. I think Ruby Amethyst tends to float to the top for multiple reasons, which I don't know, might be out of the scope of this. But I do think that most of the metagame, if you go to a tournament with a lot of players, is going to be Amber Steel. I think that's going to be the most popular deck.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know if
I have to agree.
Has that been your experience?
I have to agree. Yeah, 100%. It's been like, I don't know, if I had to put it into a percentage thing, like, it's at least 50%, maybe sometimes even over 50% Amber Steel, 30% Ruby Amethyst, and then other cool experimental decks. But I mean, we've been saying it for so long now. It's because, I think it's especially because Amber Steel was so popular in set 1. The deck is just still good in set 2, so it's the type of deck that a lot of people have the pieces for already, and you just find whatever pieces you need to complete it.
Yeah, I think that like most players can get behind like the Amber Steel ethos and like what it's trying to do, and they can have fun with the deck. Where like the Ruby Amethyst deck, or at least the old Ruby Amethyst deck, I mean, it takes like a very specific player that like likes to play control and likes that kind of gameplay, because it's very atypical, right? Like, you're not really competing on board, you're kind of just trying to whiteboard and win in the end game. And in general, it feels like in card games, people gravitate more towards these mid-range decks. And this is a mid-range deck that has a whole new world, or Wheel of Fortune, and that's just busted. It's so strong.
That being said, just because it's a deck that I would say a lot of people can play, but I still think there's a huge high skill cap to the deck. That's mainly being within the whole new world, because there's so many. I mean, that is the card that you could be in a winning position. You could play it and then you could lose the game. You could lose the game because you played this card. Obviously, you can win the game because you played the card, but if people don't understand how to use that card efficiently, then you could literally throw a game so easily. Yeah,
I think all of Lorcana is like super high skill cap, especially because the inking system is very, very punishing. Except for all the decks especially plays. Those decks. Just trying to cast just in time and cheese you on like turn 3. Anyway. So last thing in our headlines here is we hit 1K subs, which is great. Woo. Yeah, woo. So yeah, that's awesome. I mean, thank you all for your support. That's a good milestone for us. We also, I was gonna leave it to the end of the pod, but I guess I'll do it in the headlines.
The giveaway, let's go.
If you're listening on Podfly, you're probably a little confused right now, but I'm holding up the Disney 100. We're doing this as a giveaway. I finally received it in the mail, so we will draw the winners on next week's pod. The way you can enter is you leave a written review on either Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Probably do it on Apple Podcasts because I don't even know where to find the written reviews on Spotify. We've gotten so many reviews, to be honest, since we started asking for them, so that's been very, very helpful. If you want to be entered for this, get your review entered now, because I think it might take 2 or 3 days to show up, because they do a little bit of like vetting and stuff to make sure you're not saying anything crazy. Yeah, we'll draw winners next week. So thank you all so much for your support. Anyway, on to our spilled ink listener question section.
Let's go.
Or
this is always my favorite section because we get into such deep discussions about it.
It's dynamic, yeah. We have a long one this time, so I'm gonna have to try my group reading skills again. All right,
Brendan reads for the class. Yeah,
it was tough back then. It's still tough now. Right. First one here is from Roro Bear. They say locations passively generating lore while being immune to board wipes will force the meta toward more board-based combat. You can't sit back and rely on Be Prepared to put you back into a game while locations are chipping away lore. The design and balance team seems to really understand the game, and they knew Be Prepared would be a card that would warp the game around itself. So we kind of had this conversation, but I want to get your thoughts more around like the second sentence there, which is that this is a response from the balance team due to a card like Be Prepared. Be Prepared is the answer to pretty much everything in the game. Not completely everything, because there is I guess the bounce cards. There's things like Sorcerer's Spellbook,
Flute.
Yep, flute. Of course. How could I forget flute?
Can't keep ignoring the flute for no reason.
Can't ignore the flute. But do you guys think that locations is a response to? I don't know if it's a response, but you'd have to say that they had the premonition per se, because they designed 5 sets in advance, I believe, to think that the game would be warped around a card like Be Prepared, and you want to give players more tools that are uninteractable with that card.
You can go, man.
Yeah, I think it's totally possible. So my first instinct, I kind of wanted to say like maybe Be Prepared shouldn't have been printed in the first place, but then at the same time, you want some comeback mechanism to exist in the game, right? That's important. So it's these entire board wipe cards are very dangerous cards, I would say, game design wise, but they're still important. And I think not them adding more and more ways to actually play around the card is very, very smart of them.
Just agree. Yeah, honestly, I think if any card was a mistake, it's a whole new world. I think a whole new world is a fun card. I think it's a cool card. It's making the meta. It's in a good spot right now. But if there's any card, if there's any card that I would bet the house on that will get banned first in Lorcana, it is a whole new world. That card it has the potential to just be obscenely broken, and it gets pretty close now, to be honest. Next one is from Camille Boomer. They say, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on Green Steel Beast Relentless. The Green Steel Beast Relentless deck. I keep running into it more and more on ladder lately and find it tricky to play against. Do you think it has potential on paper, or is it just a pixel war trend and not a tone of potential outside of it? So the Green Steel Beast Relentless deck. I haven't played against this deck. Kawa, do you know anything about it? Because I feel like you're closer to this Green Steel archetype than I am.
Yeah, I think I didn't play against it, but somebody played it at my locals about 2 weeks ago, and all I know is that they got absolutely dumpstered, and they were really high on it. So that's not to say, listen, that's a very small scale, but I don't know. I feel like a lot of people were talking this deck up, or at least want the deck to do well, and that's fair. Okay. If a lot of people are coming into set 2 and they played set 1, to see Amber Steel again, to see Ruby Amethyst again, I understand people want to try and experiment and try and get new decks and make new things happen, which that's probably the biggest reason why I'm personally happy that Ruby Sapphire exists. But I don't know, yeah. It's hard for me to say because I also don't have enough experience against the deck, but my understanding is if I don't have much experience against the deck, there's probably a reason why people aren't playing the deck against me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
But yeah. Have you played against it much more on ladder?
Occasionally I play against Green Steel Mill or Green Steel Discard, but not really Green Steel Beast. So I think if there's potential, then most people haven't discovered it yet, and I don't see the potential yet, but maybe it still exists.
You know what? I think next set it could, if we're going towards more of a combat and board based game, then it might have potential, because at the moment the green legendary beast that basically whenever anything gets damaged, you ready to use quest, you ready to so many things have to be there in order for that card to be good. And it's the biggest thing that Brendan talked about pretty early on in this podcast, is cards that just do things when they come down are really good. But a card like Beast has has so many conditions to it, right? It has so many conditions to it. You have to have so many supporting cards in your hand to support the effect, or you have to have so many cards on the board to support the effect. And then even if you have those two things, your opponent also needs to have all these cards on the board. And it's not like even, okay, if they have like 1 or 2 cards, okay, maybe I get value, it's good. But if the whole concept of this deck is to kind of pop off and like, I don't know, this is like a very much a combo deck. Like I would not call it like an OTK deck. You know what I mean? Because I'm actually a big fan. I'm a big fan of OTK decks, but I don't think we're gonna see anything like that in Lorcana anytime soon, unless we see something absolutely busted. And if we do see something absolutely busted like that, I think it's gonna be shut down pretty quickly, because that's not gonna be healthy. Like anything like that just gets lore super fast, I think will be very bad for the game.
It's really funny how we talk about like. I think I sort of set the idea a little bit too much, or like I said it too much at the beginning, where I was like, oh, like locations will come in the force combat. I think so, but also I would not be surprised to see Ruby Amethyst do what it did in this set, because we're like, oh shit, Ruby Amethyst is going to really struggle against all this discard. Aggro got so much better, and then it was like, boom, reverse Uno. Actually, none of that matters. Ruby Amethyst is still great. And I would see in the third set, it's like, oh, Ruby Amethyst is actually the deck that plays all the locations. Then it wipes your board, and then it just passively gains. Like you never kind of know how these things will go. So it could encourage more combat, but it could also do the opposite, where it would just be like, oh, I just wipe off all of your characters, preventing you from doing combat, and then I passively gain through lore through my locations, which would be an absolute delight for.
Seems like these locations are kind of like your alternative to evasive cards that we had at the start, right? It's kind of like, they just chip a bit of lore and like,
evasives,
the opposite. Evasives you cannot attack, locations you can always attack.
Yeah, but you can't be prepared, and you can't. Like,
you can't be prepared a location. You can't dragonfire a location.
Yeah, maybe you have a mid-range deck that's all evasives and locations, and it's just like your opponent's deck just cannot deal with all of them. I don't know.
Yeah, and we're also talking about this with knowing one location card. So we could be completely wrong. There could be so many cards. Like, I don't know. Who knows? There could literally be a 3-cost card that just says get rid of a location. I don't know. You know what I mean? Who fucking knows?
Yeah. All right. Next one is from Cyberbro. They say, what are your thoughts on going first in the game? Do you think that going second needs a bit more incentive? Currently, I feel like going first just has way too much in comparison to going second, being ahead in developing ink, lore, challenging agency. I can start this one out. I think that going first in Lorcana is objectively better with every deck. So far that I've experienced has been better with every single deck. I always want to go first. There are some decks or some matchups where it is more important than others, like in set 1 and even in this set. Like sometimes when you're going second against an aggro deck, you have minimal choices or no choices at all because you're an entire ink behind. I actually do think that they need to work on that, because right now it just feels always correct to go first, and that makes the decision when you win the die roll not interesting.
I agree. I agree. Now, I agree that in terms of everyone I've played against is always like, you roll, they win it, I go first. Everyone wants to go first. I do agree with that. I feel like when the die roll happens, and if I go second, especially in certain matchups, I feel like, okay, I'm really behind or whatever. However, there's a lot of games where I've gone second and I've still done pretty well. But like, it's true. It really is true. Like, there's games where like at the very start I feel like, okay, I'm going second. I've got a shit hand, whatever. They get a shit hand, I get a shit hand, whatever. But in comparison to a lot of other games, right? I don't know. Like most of the other card games I know of have something to combat if you go second. Hearthstone has the coin. A certain game I was playing recently has like a certain mechanic where like it puts a certain like unit or character body on the board. Let's just say for example, if you were like, they wouldn't do this in Lorcana because it's a physical card game, but I guess they could print it, whatever. Imagine they just said, okay, if you go second, you just get a 1/1 on the board. That wouldn't happen, but like that's something that okay, like if I go second, maybe I actually get something else. Brendan, do you know of any other things?
Flesh and Blood. It's like so Flesh and Blood is your deck is a resource. So often in Limited and Flesh and Blood, by going first, so both players draw back up to 4 after the first turn. So if you expend cards on the first turn, you can lose tempo because your opponent goes second. So when your opponent goes second, because like I said, you both drop to 4, they get the first turn that impacts your hand, right? Because now you have to block from hand and you're actually losing those cards. Where on the first turn, you don't lose any cards. But if you go first, you can also put a card in your arsenal and you get the first 5-card hand. Also, if you're trying to beat your opponent by making them lose cards in their deck while going first, you can attrition them out of more cards. You can, because they're incentivized to block because they're effectively free rolling it, and you can trade cards 1 for 2. Flesh and Blood is a very complicated, like resource based attrition game sometimes, and like these are more advanced strategies, but there are plenty of situations where it is correct to go second in Flesh and Blood over going first.
So just to add a few mechanics from other card games where going second has some other advantage, which I think is important, and it's a little sad that we don't have it. I guess recently we had DC Dual Force, where your heroes would gain action points, and if you're going second, that would be the first turn
I remember that.
Players get action points. So that was a very good way to combat the first player advantage, I think. And then in One Piece, they just have a completely different resource system where first player has 1 resource, then second player has 2, and then the first player has 3, 4, and then until both are up to 10. So every player, like every turn, you will be the player that had this amount of resources first before your opponent, no matter if you're going first or second. So that's also very interesting. And I think I would say in a couple of these games, even with all of these mechanics in play, you still often want to be going first. So now, without these mechanics in play, you always want to be going first, and I don't think it's a small advantage. I think it's a very significant advantage, no matter the matchup, no matter the deck. And yes, that it doesn't feel great. Even if, of course, it's very possible to win games going second, but it doesn't feel great when such a big part of your chances to win or lose are already decided on going first or second. I think that is maybe one of the biggest issue the game currently has, game design-wise.
I agree.
It's a big issue with probably card games in general, isn't it? You're trying to minimize that RNG effectively, unless you're Marvel Snap, of, like wanting it to be kind of as fair as possible, but obviously some decks will take advantage of, like, what they want is, okay, some decks will take advantage of going first, some decks will take advantage of going second, but in this situation, in Lorcana, there's no deck that wants to go second, right? There's no deck.
There's an interesting dynamic there, because you mentioned RNG and wanting to avoid that, but actually card games want that. So card games actually want that RNG to an extent for a few reasons. Like, there's this idea that you want there to be an inherent win rate to a deck, regardless of like the objective skill of the players, whether or not. There's a reason why you play best 2 out of 3 in Lorcana. Is like, let's say that your opponent's deck, like if you take like Magic, right? Like, there's like this chance, like you'll be at best like 70-30 into a match. It's almost regardless of skill, because you have this like inherent fail rate with like lands and, all other kinds of things, matchup. But when you take a 70-30 and then you put it across a best 2 out of 3, it actually comes down significantly to where like the better player wins most of the time. That's why best of 1 can feel so bad. And like there is an aspect of game design where this inherent RNG, or this ability for the player that is less skilled, and I don't want to put it this way, but less deserving of the win, can win, because if you have a game that doesn't have that, it can feel really, really bad. So like, there's a game that exists like that. It's called Flesh and Blood. And basically the worst player wins a vast majority of the time. And they've now been working via design in the sets to include more variants and include more decks that utilize variants and RNG to have spiky turns in order to mitigate this. Because right now in Flesh and Blood, if you come in as a new player, you'll get beat down for months. You will just lose every single game. You will never win most of the time, depending on your opponent. And that's actually really not a good thing. And some of that can be mitigated with, like, there is this inherent power to just winning the die roll, to this initial RNG. The reason why I don't like it in Lorcana is because there's no... we have this die roll, right? And once you win the die roll, you're presented with a choice. Should I go first or second? It's not a choice. There's no choice. So it's like, it might as well just be like whoever wins the die roll goes first right now. And I wish they would put push and pull there.
Okay, so because for me, I think it's different. I think even if some decks would want to go second, some would want to go first, I think it would still be a frustrating thing for so much of the game being decided before it was already started. I think that would still be an issue. And I agree that it's important that the quote-unquote worst player occasionally wins. I think that's very important. But I think if there's some variance or stuff that decides that maybe the little bit worse player wins the game, I don't like that it's before the game starts. If it's like happens in the middle of the game, I think that feels a lot better than if it's at the start of the game.
Even if it's an illusion, right? Because that's an interesting concept. Because if it happens in the middle of the game, did it happen in the middle of the game? Or did it also happen at the start of the game because of like how the decks were just initially set up as you put them there? It was like predetermined, right, from the setup of the deck. Yeah, I mean, this is all like deep theory of card games, like philosophy of card games. But to answer the question, I do think you're correct, Cyberbro. It is overwhelmingly better to go first in this game. And the gap feels a little big right now. I mean, especially in Chapter 1 against some of those aggro decks, I would be going second and be like, well, I basically have almost no chance to win this game. So I'll try to win game 2. And I'll try to get very lucky in game 3. I do think, though, that some people put a little bit too much, they give a little too much credence to that, like they automatically lose the game if they go second. It's absolutely not the case. I remember I played against one player that, like, before we even rolled the dice, he was just like, yeah, I just feel like this game is up to the dice roll. And it's just like, basically absolving himself of any responsibility of playing the game correctly or like all of that. And he won the die roll. And after the end, when he lost, he was like, yep, this game is all about the die roll. And I was like, metaphorically? And he was like, what? And I was like, you won the die roll. And he's like, well, yeah. It was like, this, that. I don't know. I think it's important to try to analyze your own play and not point to these variance factors as reasons why you lost. Because the reason we play card games is because there's variance, believe it or not, even when it feels like shit sometimes. All right.
Just what? Okay, I know we're going a long time about this, but I just wanted one thing to add, because like I and I think we as podcast want to be teaching players to analyze their own plays, right? I think that we all think that's important, but the issue with, or not the issue with that is, but I think like the flip side of that is game design wise, I think it's important to give players illusions that they can point towards why they would be losing the game, so that they can say, oh, I lost because of this, and that they don't have to say, oh, it was my own fault. But like as players that want to improve, it is important to analyze, of course.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, Kawa, I'm actually gonna. You have to earn your keep this week. This one's,
bro. Are you bringing back the section? We're testing Kawa.
No, I did it. No, you got to read the next question from Connor Morgan. I read it last week. It was hard. Now it's your turn. This is a 3-paragraph question.
Okay, so Connor Morgan says, great content, guys, and love wrapping up my work week listing on Friday afternoons. I had some thoughts on Popsicle decks and Fishbone Quill. Popsicle is underperforming in the meta because the lists are unoptimized. People are trying too many gimmicks like Maurice's Workshop and Tamatoa, or using individually bad cards like Scepter versus aiming for consistency. The deck clearly has the best draw engine and it should be abused, but not at the extent of making the deck less consistent. Draw engines reduce your deck size in a game, and you want to aim to draw consistent quality cards. From my own experience with pixel, climbing, and in-person play, this deck should be built as a hyper-control deck by getting constant value off of your characters. This would be Max Tremaine, Hades, Floodborn Gaston, etc. These cards always have meaningful impact when you drop them and don't rely on situational combos, which leads to bricking. 12 copies of Maleficent Dragons in your deck is insane, and in control mirrors, whoever has more advantage-based removal will come out on top. Amber Steel also cannot keep up with this unless they high roll, and the matchup favors Popsicle far more than Ruby Amethyst, slight advantage against the deck. You want me to stop there, or you want me to keep going?
Keep going.
Okay. Great. As for Fishbone Quill versus inking off the top, I generally agree with you guys except for the context of this deck. When I am evaluating using different kinds of removal, such as double Tremaine versus Be Prepared, the amount of copies left in my deck matters for my decision. When I play a card like Mickey, I now have imperfect knowledge of my deck. While you can argue that this is irrelevant, it actually does matter when it comes to using removal optimally in grindy games. For now, I believe the Grammatala / Teeth combo and Quill provide adequate ramp, and I always know what's in my inkwell. If the meta changed to the point where I require more ramp and will sacrifice deck knowledge to do so, then it would be worth adding Mickey or One Jump in addition to what I'm already using. Even then, I would probably just consider Bell unless the meta is heavily slanted to aggro. Curious on your thoughts. Keep up the great content. Let me just say before Brendan and Moyen dive deep into this, this is a very intelligent card gamer, in my opinion. I think that he really, really knows what he's talking about. And I have to say, I really appreciate the in-depth comment, because this gets us in deep discussions, and we'll often learn from this ourselves. And, you know, we're very much the type of people that we want to listen to your guys' opinions on cards, and like we'll kind of consider it. And it's often happened where it has actually changed our view on cards. Like even last week, Moyen, you even said, after reading everyone's comments about Fishbone Quill, you really understand why people were playing it over just the Mickey, right? Like you really respected people's reason for playing it, even if you preferred the Mickey over and you gave your reasoning. It's really important to have these debates and these discussions. So thank you very much for the comment. Okay, Brendan, off you go, my friend. What do you think?
First thing I want to poke at is this sentence that in control mirrors, whoever has a more advantage base removal will come out on top. I don't know about in Lorcana. I agree with you. That's like a general philosophy around control mirrors, but in Lorcana, especially like due to how the win condition works, I think that you can, like we were in chapter 1, even now with the new evasive Minnie Mouse with the 1/3, like that card is better than 1/1 removal is later in the game, because if your opponent has to use something like a 1/1 removal in the form of Dragonfire, I know Maleficent is the 2/1, but in form of Dragonfire to remove your Mickey, I think that you win out on that trade. So it is a form of removal in and of itself. You remove Dragonfire from your opponent's deck, they remove your Mickey on board, and you maybe get the board presence and the lore gain out of it. So I don't think that is an absolute in terms of control mirrors. I often like to position myself as the deck that is asking the question and is the aggressor in that matchup. Also, I think we did give credence to something that you alluded to here in paragraph 3 about milling cards and, specific combos that you're trying to do, but that's only if you go through your entire deck. Literally if you go through your entire deck. If you don't do that, I think it's completely irrelevant. Even if, like, there will be some times when you mill the key card that could win you the game, and maybe you lose that game. But the inherent fail rate there should be so infinitesimally low that it should be irrelevant. And I think that milling cards is a concept in general that players think about incorrectly, because they mill the top of their deck, right? So you mill the card that you would draw, but it's irrelevant, because just if you looked at it like this, what if you milled the card on the bottom of your deck? Would it change the way you evaluate that situation? It probably would, but it shouldn't, because they're the same card. They're effectively the same card. Unless you tuck a card down or, pitch a card to the bottom, the top card and the bottom card are the same card. So just because
unless you're playing Cauldron or something like that, then it really does not matter. It's essentially the same thing.
Yeah, so like milling a card off the top of your deck only matters if you go through your entire deck. So
yeah, we also got that comment, I think, on last week's pod, where someone said, "Oh, milling top card versus milling bottom card is actually different." There's no difference. So like, why would milling bottom card matter if you wouldn't have seen it in the entire game? I think we talked about it a lot on last week's pod. I would like not to talk too much about it on this week's pod as well. But I think whoever has more advantage-based removal will come out on top. Is true on a base level. So you added, okay, but threats can also be removal because they need to be answered, and so they can also trade for cards, which is, I think, one good argument to have there. And I think the second one is, I think it used to be the case that maybe if you have more advantage-based removal, like Tremaine, Hades or Maleficent would usually favor you. But I think it's changed with Spellbook and the Merlins and the bounce package and everything. I think that enables you winning the game even while getting outvalued, which wasn't that easy to do before. And I think with that being enabled, you can still lose the game even if you have like 3 Maleficents in hand and your opponent is at 15 and they have a Spellbook and you're like, okay, even if I'm going to out-resource my opponent, I can't catch up. So I think that's very important. But I think the point about the Popsicle deck underperforming due to maybe wanting to do the card draw stuff too much, I think is very smart. And I could maybe see it that if you build the deck a little bit different, because sometimes the deck can feel like you're doing stuff, you're cycling your deck, maybe you're drawing one extra card or something, but you're not actually doing too much, and it still can be clunky at times. So I can see that maybe building the deck in a way where you include more of these cards that are like consistently good every time you play them could make the deck a little bit better. So I think that's good food for thought. How I would spin these thoughts further would be, okay, but what are the issues with the deck, and does this actually fix the issues of the deck? Because I'm thinking maybe the issues will still persist. And so how I would describe the Popsicle deck in the current meta is like it completely destroys Ember Steel, as you correctly said, more so than Ruby Amethyst does. But I also think that it has problems against aggro and problems against Ruby Amethyst itself. And I think both of these issues will not be fixed by putting more consistently good cards into the deck. I think both of those issues will still exist and will still hold the deck back in the current meta.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Yeah, I mean, well put. So I agree. Next one here is from Trent. They said, I'd recommend avoiding the Houston 2K. I was at GalaxyCon, in quotations, 2K, and they cut the pricing in half and didn't tell anybody. Only found out after I got in the car. After I got in the car with my prize, PPG is a super shady org. Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know anything about PPG personally, but I mean, it is good advice. I mean, I don't know if it's good advice, but it is advice because we were considering going to the Houston 2K and cutting pricing for whatever reason, and it happens, right? It especially happens when like not enough people show up. That's probably not going to happen in Lorcana because Lorcana, the tournaments are selling out, filling like crazy. So, but yeah, sometimes tournament organizers will do that. They'll be like, "Oh, it's a 2K," and then when like 30% of the people they expected to sign up, like, "Oh, now it's a 1K," and you're like, "What? I paid 1K to get here." It's like, yeah. So yeah, just thanks, Trent. Last one here is from Thunderkeg. They say the top card of your all right, here we go. The top card of your deck is never equally unimportant or uninkable. You can look at all the cards you've seen and make an estimation of the cards in the rest of your deck, and if the cards are the one in the rest of the deck are the ones you need. If you haven't seen any Be Prepared, the odds of one being on top of your library are not the same as if they would be if you already saw them and you knew you only had one left in the deck. The odds change on the fly and are possible to judge. This isn't Snap, where you only have one of, and every card is equally likely to be any other one. I would say that this one didn't make sense to me.
I didn't really completely get it. So it is true that if I've seen a copy of my 4B prepared, that it's less likely to draw another copy than if I haven't seen it. It's just I don't know what we're trying to say, right?
Yeah. It's still equally likely to be. So let's say that I've seen one Be Prepared. I have 20 cards in deck. It's equally likely to be at any position in the 20 cards, right? Unless I put a card on the bottom of the deck. All positions of the card in that deck, all three copies of positions that could be possible in that deck are equally likely to one another. So it being on the top of my deck, I guess, is in relation to it being 20, but it's could just be on the. I don't know. It just wouldn't affect how I would play the game, I don't think. In regards to milling the top.
Yeah,
of my
I don't
deck.
think if I ever. Okay, let's just say I played 3 Mickeys. I guess the more you play, maybe it starts to matter. It all matters for how long the game goes, right? Like it would matter a lot more if you were seeing all of your cards every single game, right? But like you said, if there was 20 and let's just say I played 2 Mickeys, I don't think in my mind I'm ever realistically being like, oh, one of my Be Prepareds could have been on my Mickey. Like, I'm still playing the game to say that my Be Prepareds are in my deck. I'm never really thinking like, oh, it's gonna be in the top. Oh, I'm just gonna lose wherever. Like, you have to just play the odds, and you know what I mean. I personally don't think it impacts how I would play the game.
I think that's the key right there. Is like, is it possible that my Mickey milled the Be Prepared that I'm waiting to draw in order to win the game? Yes. So I think a lot of this gets into philosophy, which is weird. I think ultimately, we really go down the rabbit hole, but ultimately, I would never, ever change the way that I play Mickey Mouse or One Jump Ahead in order to account for this. I think that the information is so potentially irrelevant and not important to the actual gameplay that you would never take a suboptimal line in order to respond to this information. I mean, probably 99.9% of the time. There's maybe an outlier or corner case, but ultimately, it doesn't change you taking the high value line, in my opinion.
Also, is there when you play Mickey Mouse, there is not even any information, right?
Yeah, no,
you just ink it without ever seeing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's not even a point. So like, it doesn't actually change anything. There's not even this minuscule information part. It just doesn't matter. So it's like, if you lose the game and you would have won with a Be Prepared and you check what card did my Mickey Mouse ink and it's a Be Prepared, that doesn't mean anything. It's like a fun thing to do. You can say, oh, I would have gotten the Be Prepared if it wasn't in my ink. But that doesn't mean that Mickey Mouse, on average, changes anything about how likely you are to actually draw the Be Prepared.
Yeah. I think some people also look at that and they look at these lines. They're like, oh, there was, I took the correct line and I lost the game. Yes, that's okay. That happens.
That happens. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You should still take the correct line. Like you would lose vastly more games by taking the suboptimal lines to avoid that scenario than you would in the outlier or corner case where it does lose you the game. You still, like, there is an inherent fail rate to the optimal line in the correct strategy, and that's just the card game. So you can't avoid that in a reasonable way. Anything else?
I agree.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's it. Yeah, we're done. Bye, guys.
I mean, we'll be. I think we'll be talking about this concept for years because it comes up in every card game, and it's it's a discussion for sure. It's
interesting. It is interesting to have the discussion. I mean, ultimately, we arrive at the point that's like, okay, well, it actually kind of doesn't matter, but I think it's still good to have these discussions.
So for me, I would say, like, for us, this concept's very clear, but I think it is very understandable that initially you would have these thoughts of, oh, it could be a disadvantage to middle card, or to Mickey Mouse at the top card of Middeck. I think it completely makes sense. So you need to really think about it and then get it into your head that it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean,
well said.
Yeah, I definitely had these exact, this is exactly how I approach card games initially as well. And also, like, there's derivatives of this kind of thoughts, which is like over-evaluating like information on your opponent's hand or their deck and stuff like that. Like the card like Probe or whatever. I forget what that card is called in here, but what is effectively Peak in Magic the Gathering. That card, we compared it to Gitaxian Probe in Magic, which is a broken card, but that card was broken because it cost 0 mana. And this card costs 1. So it's like, would I pay 1 resource in order to get this information and tempo myself out of an entire turn? Because you go from turn 5 to turn 4 when you pay the 1. It's like, no, you wouldn't. The information is not irrelevant, but it's also not relevant enough to warrant an entire ink. So yeah, it's an interesting concept. Anyway, we did have our main topic prepared for today, but I think we're going to leave it till next week, and that's just like we're going to talk about how to prepare for events, because how to prepare for events, and especially how to prepare for paper events, is very interesting. Like drawing up your expected metagame is something to consider. It could be regionally based. It's likely not 100% representative of what's on Pixelborn. Like, you can't just look at the Pixelborn data. You need to understand like what kind of deck you're going to bring to the tournament. You're going to play the best deck. You're going to play a deck that tries to beat the deck. You're going to try to break the meta with a new unknown deck. How long should you be testing that deck in order, before the tournament, before you give up on an idea like that? What does proper testing look like? Like, why would you need a testing team? Why are testing teams important? Why wouldn't you just play on Pixelborn? How do you form a testing team, and like what should you like? How do you test? Right, testing schedules, getting data, aggregating that data, understanding and learning from your results, and also the day of. So being prepared for long hours. These early tournaments in Lorcana will likely be run inefficiently. It's just how card games go. They'll probably be 12 to 14 hours or something around those lines. Like, how do you prepare for that? How do you get old? There's things that people don't consider when they think about playing a card game for long, which is like food, sustenance, water, etc. But like also game plans, not in this game, but what would be sideboard guides. All these kinds of things need to be prepared for, so you can reduce as much.
Be prepared.
Yeah, exactly. So you can reduce as much mental load as possible before you're actually getting into the match. And then, of course, they'll go through 8 rounds in a single day. Maybe lose round 1, round 2, and let it tilt you. But you got to take everything match by match, game by game. And then also we'll talk about how to deal with nerves, because if you haven't played a physical card game at a major tournament with hundreds of people in a convention center, you're probably going to be pretty nervous. It's just how it goes, especially if you get on feature match. Feature match is something you definitely have to get used to. And it's I don't know. Some people are better at it than others, but it's definitely an acquired taste. All right. That's it for this episode. We're closing out again. We do have the giveaway for the Disney 100, which I'll hold up one more time. We'll be going out the written reviews on Apple Podcasts. So if you want to get submitted, shoot us one of those. Thank you to all the people that have done so far. You've helped us out immensely on pod platforms. So we really, really appreciate it. And yeah, the number one thing you can do is leave us a review on one of those platforms, so Spotify or Apple Podcasts. We did a pretty long question section that dragged on this week, but if you want to get your question or statement read out, just shoot us a comment on YouTube. That's where we field those. There's a video version of this on YouTube as well, youtube.com/Podcana podcast. Hit that subscribe while you're there. Once again, we hit 1K subscribers, so thank you so much. Twitter's our Brennan APG, Moyen _HS, Kawa Tech _CG. Thank y'all so much for listening. We'll see you next week.